The heavy, ivory-pressed envelope felt like a weapon in Elena's hand, cold, sharp, and weighted with the kind of history that leaves scars. She stared at her reflection in the full-length mirror, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the strap of her midnight blue silk gown. Tonight wasn't about closure. Closure was a fairy tale told to people who still had hope. Tonight was about survival. "You don't have to do this," her own voice echoed in the silent, dimly lit room. She wasn't just going to a wedding. She was walking into the lion's den to watch the man who once promised her forever place a ring on someone else's finger. Hello, my wonderful listeners. It is so good to have you here with me today. Before we step into the whirlwind of tonight's story, take a quick moment to tell me, where are you tuning in from? I love hearing about the corners of the world you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It truly helps our little community grow and ensures you don't miss a single beat of the stories we share. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and suffocating expectations. As Elena stepped through the grand archway, the murmurs died down like a candle flame pinched between thumb and forefinger. She held her chin high, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. She caught sight of him then, Julian standing at the altar, looking every bit the man who had traded her love for prestige. He looked past her, then froze, his expression curdling from joy to pure, unadulterated panic. But it wasn't Julian who made the breath hitch in her throat. It was the man standing to his right. Elias, the older brother, the recluse of the family, a man whose reputation for ruthless indifference was whispered about in every high society circle. He wasn't watching the bride. He wasn't watching his brother. His eyes, dark and piercing like deep-sea obsidian, were fixed solely on Elena. There was an intensity in his gaze that felt physical, a heat that started at her skin and seared its way into her very bones. As the officiant began to speak, the world around Elena seemed to tilt on its axis. A sudden, sharp pain flared behind her eyes, followed by a sensation like lightning striking through her chest. She gasped, stumbling back, and in that same heartbeat, Elias stepped forward, his eyes widening in a mix of fury and raw, terrifying recognition. What happens when the life you meticulously planned is ripped away by a force you didn't know existed? Was she here to reclaim her past, or was she about to be claimed by a future that terrified her? The silence in the ballroom was absolute, save for the rhythmic, jagged pulse of Elena's own heart. She felt the heavy, suffocating weight of 300 gazes, the pitying eyes of socialites, the sharp, judging stare of Julian's bride, and the sheer, raw power radiating from Elias, who remained locked in place, his hands clenched so tightly at his sides that the knuckles turned white. Elena forced a steadying breath, though her lungs felt like they were filled with crushed glass. She was Elena Vance, a woman who had spent the last 2 years scrubbing the remnants of Julian's influence out of her life. She was a woman who built a quiet, successful life as an archivist, finding solace in the dusty, predictable pages of history rather than the messy, unpredictable ache of human emotion. She didn't do chaos. She didn't do grand gestures. Yet here she was, the center of an imploding reality. She looked at Julian. He was everything she had once thought she needed. Charismatic, ambitious, and utterly hollow. He looked at her now with a mix of resentment and fear, the look of a man who had left a gold mine behind only to realize he had brought home lead. But then her gaze pulled back to Elias. Elias Thorne was the shadow to Julian's spotlight. While Julian played the charming heir, Elias had spent his life building an empire of technology and security that made the family's old money wealth look like pocket change. He was rarely seen, and when he was spoken of in cold, clinical terms. They said his heart was a vault, locked tight and guarded by a man who trusted no one. As she stood there, paralyzed, a memory flickered in her mind, an old legend her grandmother had whispered about, a story of an ancient, unavoidable pull. The blood knows its match before the mind dares to admit it, she had said. Elias finally moved. He didn't look at his brother. He didn't offer an apology to the room. He simply began to walk toward her, cutting through the sea of expensive silk and expensive perfume. Every step he took felt like a seismic event. Elena wanted to run, but her feet were rooted to the polished marble floor. She saw the flickers of confusion in the eyes of the guests, the way the air seemed to ionize between them. She needed to know who this man was, and why he was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. I hope you're feeling the tension building as much as I am. This is where the foundation of everything begins to crack. If you're enjoying the suspense so far, please make sure you're subscribed. It helps you keep up with every part of this journey as we unravel these secrets together. And let me know in the comments, what would you do if you were in Elena's shoes right now? Would you stand your ground or run for the nearest exit? Elias stopped just inches from her. The proximity was startling. He smelled like ozone and cedarwood, a scent that felt inexplicably like home. He didn't speak, but his hand hovered near her elbow, trembling, a sign of restraint that was entirely uncharacteristic for a man who ruled over his own personal kingdom with an iron fist. The deepest fear in Elena's heart wasn't that he would hurt her. It was that he was right. That this strange burning pull wasn't a trick of the lights or a reaction to the stress of the wedding. It was something primal, a recognition that shattered every defense she had carefully constructed since the day Julian left her for a life she didn't want. She looked up, meeting his gaze, and for the first time in her life, she saw someone looking back at her who didn't see an ex-girlfriend, a social prop, or a ghost from a past life. He saw a partner. And that terrified her more than anything else. The silence in the ballroom reached a deafening crescendo. The air wasn't just heavy. It was charged, vibrating with a frequency that made the crystal chandeliers overhead hum in sympathetic resonance. Julian, standing at the altar with his pale, trembling bride, took a step forward, his voice cracking. "Elias? What the hell are you doing? This is my wedding." Elias didn't even glance at his brother. His eyes remained locked on Elena, his expression a volatile mixture of disbelief and an almost primal hunger. He moved a fraction closer, invading her personal space until the heat radiating from him became the only thing she could feel. The distance between them wasn't just physical. It was a psychological barrier being dismantled in real time. "Julian," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that seemed to bypass Elena's ears and anchor itself directly in her chest. "Cancel this. It's over." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, and the frantic clicking of heels against marble created a wall of chaotic noise. A waiter dropped a tray of champagne flutes, the sound of shattering glass punctuating the tension like a gunshot. Elena felt the pull tighten. Tea was a physical tugging sensation, an invisible tether between her heart and the man before her, drawing them together with the weight of 1,000 years of history. This was the inciting incident of her entire life. The moment the veil of her mundane reality was ripped away to reveal something ancient and terrifyingly real. She looked down and gasped. A faint, glowing mark, intricate, silver, and resembling a jagged pulse, was beginning to bloom across the surface of her skin, starting at her wrist and spiraling upward toward her pulse point. Elias mirrored the motion, ripping the cuff of his shirt away to reveal an identical burning sigil on his own forearm. The room fell into a terrified, reverent silence. This wasn't just a scene, it was an activation. According to the old bloodlines, a mating bond wasn't something you agreed to, it was something you survived. And in this moment, under the mocking glitter of the chandelier, Elena was faced with a choice that would rewrite her existence. She could turn and run, plunging back into a world that no longer made sense, or she could accept that the man standing before her, the man who, until moments ago, was merely her ex's older brother, was now the only anchor she had in a world that was suddenly violently shifting. Julian's face went from pale to a ghastly shade of gray. "No," he hissed, stepping off the altar, his pride bruising his sanity. "That's impossible. That myth is just a story we told children to keep them in line." "It's not a story, brother," Elias murmured, his eyes never leaving Elena's. "It's a sentence." He reached out, his fingers grazing her palm. The contact sent a shockwave of white-hot clarity through Elena's mind. Suddenly, she didn't just see Elias. She felt his memories, his cold, lonely nights spent guarding his family's legacy, his deep-seated cynicism toward a world that valued appearances over truth. She saw that his distance wasn't a choice. It was a shield he had built because he was waiting for this. Are you holding your breath yet? Because this is where the stakes get truly impossible. If you're loving the intensity of this moment, please drop a comment below and let me know. Have you ever felt a connection so strong it felt like fate? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We have so much more to uncover and you won't want to miss a single second of what happens next. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had arrived here to prove she was over Julian, but she was leaving with something far more permanent. She was bound. And in the eyes of the law, the family, and the archaic rules of their world, she belonged to the man who terrified her the most. The ballroom was no longer a place of celebration. It was a pressure cooker about to shatter. Elias didn't wait for an answer. He simply reached out and caught Elena's hand, not with the casual touch of a stranger, but with a firm, possessive grip that left no room for debate. The skin-to-skin contact sent a jolt of raw electric energy surging through her veins, a sensation so overwhelming that for a second her vision blurred. "Get out," Elias commanded, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the lethal authority of a king. He wasn't talking to the guests, he was talking to his brother. Julian lunged forward, his face twisted in a mask of wounded ego. "You think you can just take her? She was mine first, Elias. This circus, it's just some sick trick you've planned to humiliate me." Elena felt Elias's posture shift, his body tensing like a coiled spring. The sheer, predatory grace of his movements was terrifying. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. He simply stepped in front of Elena, shielding her from Julian's pathetic outburst as if she were a precious relic he had spent centuries waiting to recover. "She was never yours, Julian," Elias said, his voice cold enough to freeze the champagne in the glasses. "You were just a temporary distraction in a life that was destined for someone else. You never deserved the weight of her presence, and you certainly never understood the value of her soul. I hope you are all still sitting on the edge of your seats, because the tension here is just getting started. If you're enjoying this ride, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to make sure you're around when the full story unfolds. And tell me in the comments, what's the most intense moment you've ever had to face in your own life? I love reading your stories while we build this one together." They exited the hall, the silence in their wake more deafening than any scream. Outside, the cool night air of the city hit Elena like a slap of reality. Elias ushered her into a black sedan that had materialized from the shadows, his hand lingering on the small of her back, a gesture that felt like a claim. As the city blurred past the windows, the silence in the car was thick, pulsating with the unspoken questions screaming in Elena's mind. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Why now? I spent 2 years trying to forget this family, trying to erase every trace of your name from my life. Why does fate decide to drop this on me, of all people, on the worst night possible?" Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable, though his eyes burned with a fire that seemed to consume the darkness of the car. "Fate doesn't care about your timing, Elena. It only cares about the truth. And the truth is I've been feeling this pull for years, a hollow space in my chest that nothing could fill. I thought it was burnout. I thought it was the burden of the company. It wasn't until I saw you walk into that room that I realized I was just waiting for the day my soul finally recognized its home." He didn't touch her, but the air between them was so heavy with attraction it felt like a physical weight. Elena wanted to argue, to deny it, to tell him that she couldn't just jump from one brother to another. But every time she looked at him, her heart skipped a beat, and her mind betrayed her by wanting exactly what he was offering. As they pulled up to his private estate, a fortress of glass and steel hidden deep within the woods, she realized the danger wasn't just coming from the outside. The true danger was the way he looked at her, as if he knew every secret she kept and he loved her anyway. She was walking into the lair of the most powerful man in the city, bound by a mark she couldn't remove and a pull she couldn't escape. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a game where the rules were being written in blood and desire. The estate was a cathedral of solitude, all obsidian glass and cold, brushed steel, perched on a cliffside that dropped into a churning gray sea. As Elias ushered Elena into the grand foyer, the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy with the weight of centuries-old secrets. He didn't take her to a guest room. He led her to a private study, a room lined with ancient leather-bound books and heavy iron-locked cabinets. He walked to the center of the room and pressed his palm against a concealed panel. With a mechanical hiss, a hidden compartment opened, revealing a display that defied everything Elena understood about the world. Inside sat a series of artifacts, shards of obsidian, glowing crystalline fragments, and an ancient handwritten ledger that pulsed with a faint rhythmic light identical to the mark on her arm. "You think this is a coincidence?" Elias said, his voice stripped of its usual icy detachment. He stepped toward her, his movements fluid like a predator at rest. "You think this bond is just a biological quirk, a relic of fairy tales. But it is a weapon, Elena. It has always been a weapon. He turned the pages of the ledger. Our ancestors weren't just wealthy men. They were the keepers of the meridian. The bond isn't just about attraction. It's about power. It's a conduit. When two people from specific bloodlines are bound, they become a single living circuit. That is why I have been so cold, so distant. I knew that the moment I found my match, I would no longer be just a man. I would be a vessel for something that has been dormant for 300 years. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. You're saying I wasn't just chosen by fate. I was recruited by my own biology. It is both a curse and a gift, he confessed, his hands hovering near her shoulders but refusing to make contact. The bond is a catalyst. My brother Julian has been searching for this ledger his entire life. He didn't marry for love. He married to secure the Thorn family's influence because he knew I was the one prophesied to unlock the meridian. He's not just a scorned ex, Elena. He is a man who would burn this entire city to the ground to strip this power from me, from us. The revelation hit her with the force of an avalanche. Everything she had known, the way Julian had discarded her, the way he had hovered around the family's business archives. It wasn't a breakup. It was a failure on his part. He hadn't left her. He had realized she wasn't the catalyst he needed, and then in a stroke of cosmic irony, she had walked right into the arms of the man who was. Are you absolutely stunned? Because I know I am. The stakes have just shifted from a romantic drama to a battle for survival. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the mystery, please hit that subscribe button right now. You don't want to miss the fallout of this discovery. And I'd love to hear your theories. Does Elena trust him after this, or is this just another trap? Let me know in the comments below. Elias looked at her, his eyes raw with invulnerability she had never seen before. I didn't want this life for you, Elena. I spent my life trying to outrun the prophecy, trying to lock away the power. But when I saw you today, the bond ignited. It wasn't my choice. It was the universe demanding we stop hiding. He finally reached out, taking her hands in his. This time the spark wasn't just electric. It was a vision. She saw herself standing at his side, surrounded by a light so brilliant it could shatter the dark. She saw Julian watching from the shadows, his face twisted in a cold, calculating rage. The midpoint had been reached and the game had fundamentally changed. She wasn't an ex-girlfriend anymore. She was the final piece of an ancient, dangerous puzzle. The study door shuddered under a violent impact, the wood groaning as if pleading for mercy. Julian stepped through the threshold, his silhouette framed by a jagged flash of lightning that illuminated the madness in his eyes. He wasn't just a scorned ex anymore. He was a man unmoored, his obsession with the family legacy having finally hollowed out his humanity. In his hand he held a pulsating metallic device. A siphon designed to draw the energy of the bond out of the air, to snap the connection between them like a dry twig. The air in the room grew instantly frigid. Elena felt her lungs seize, her very consciousness flickering like a dying bulb. As the device whirred to life, she collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest. She could feel Elias through the thinning, painful tether of their bond. He was somewhere in the dark, battered, bleeding and fighting off a dozen men, but his presence was fading. You don't understand, Elena, Julian hissed, closing the distance between them. I've spent months researching how to strip this power. Once the bond is severed, you'll be a shell and I will be the one to claim the mantle. Elias was never going to love you, he was just going to use your soul as a key to lock his own ego behind a wall of ancient power. Elena looked up, her vision tunneling. She felt a phantom pain in her shoulder, a mirror of the blow Elias was taking in the hallway. She tried to stand, but her limbs felt like lead. This was it, the end of the path she had only just started to walk. She was alone, the man she was fated to protect was dying, and the person she had once loved was holding a knife to the throat of her future. I know, the tension is almost unbearable right now. If you're feeling the desperation, drop a comment below and tell me, how would you survive if you were in Elena's shoes? And please make sure you're subscribed. We are reaching the breaking point and you won't want to miss how she navigates this storm. Your support keeps these stories alive. The room seemed to spin. The device in Julian's hand emitted a high-pitched, agonizing whine that seemed to shred her very thoughts. She saw a flicker of the life she used to have, the quiet, safe, boring life she had craved so desperately, and it seemed like a dream from another lifetime. She had been so afraid of losing her independence. But standing here, staring into the abyss of Julian's malice, she realized she had been losing her soul all along by trying to play it safe. She watched as Julian reached out, his hand trembling with a mix of triumph and greed. He was going to kill the best thing that had ever happened to her. She looked down at the mark on her wrist, now glowing with a dull, failing light. It wasn't just a mark. It was a promise. And she realized, with a surge of terrifying, cold clarity, that she wouldn't let it be broken. She closed her eyes, ignoring the pain, and reached out, not with her hands, but with the sudden, fierce surge of her own will. She didn't call for Elias to save her. She called for the power that had chosen her. If they were a circuit, if they were a single living force, she didn't need to be his damsel. She could be the other half of the storm. The air in the room didn't just vibrate, it shattered. As Julian reached out with the siphon, his face twisting in a sneer of absolute certainty, Elena didn't cower. She didn't retreat. She stood up, her legs locking with a newfound iron strength that defied the agony coursing through her nerves. She realized with blinding clarity that the bond wasn't a tether that restrained her. It was a conduit that had been waiting for her to stop playing the victim. She reached out, grabbing the metallic housing of the siphon with both hands. It didn't burn her, instead it sang to her. She channeled every scrap of her frustration, every heartbreak from her past, and every ounce of the fierce, protective love she had discovered for Elias into the device. "You think you can break a legacy, Julian?" she whispered, her voice amplified by a resonance that shook the foundation of the house. "You don't understand the power you're trying to steal because you never truly wanted to be part of it. You only wanted to possess it." The siphon began to glow with a blinding, white-hot intensity. The metal started to warp, melting like wax under the pressure of the energy flowing through her. Julian shrieked, recoiling as the device tore itself apart in his hands, sending a shockwave of kinetic energy cascading through the study. The windows blew outward, shattering into a million diamond-like shards that danced in the storm-tossed air. In the hallway, the fighting stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and expectant. Elena felt the connection to Elias surge back to life, stronger and more vibrant than it had ever been. It wasn't just a physical pull anymore. It was a mental bridge. She could feel him standing up, his lungs filling with breath, his eyes locking onto hers from across the threshold. He wasn't just a man fighting for his life, he was a king returning to his throne. He looked at her, his expression a masterpiece of awe and raw, unvarnished devotion. "You did it," he breathed, the words echoing not just in the room but in their shared consciousness. Julian lay on the floor, dazed and defeated, the wreckage of his ambitions scattered around him. Elena didn't look at him with hatred. She looked at him with the crushing indifference of a woman who had finally realized her own worth. "I can barely type this, the energy is so intense. Are you feeling the shift, my wonderful viewers? This is the moment everything changes. If you are loving the power Elena is showing, please drop a yes in the comments. It helps the algorithm find others who love stories like this. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now. The final act is going to be absolutely explosive." She turned toward Elias. He was bloodied, his suit ruined, but he was standing tall. He didn't rush to her. He walked with the slow, reverent pace of a man approaching the most important moment of his existence. He stood before her, and for the first time he didn't need to shield her. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle as a whisper. "The bond is stabilized," he said, his eyes reflecting the storm outside and the peace within. "We are complete. And we are going to finish this." The air in the study wasn't just air anymore. It was ionized, alive, and vibrating with the resonance of a bond fully realized. Elena and Elias stood in the center of the wreckage, the storm outside howling against the broken windows, but inside, a profound, deafening silence held them together. Julian scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of primal, shaking fury. He looked at the shattered remains of his siphon, then at his brother and the woman he had dismissed as a footnote in his grand design. He reached into his inner pocket, pulling out a small, obsidian-crusted detonator, the final desperate card in his hand. "If I can't have the legacy, if I can't command the power, then no one will." Julian screamed, his thumb hovering over the button. "I've rigged the entire cliffside with structural charges. This house is coming down and we're all going into the sea." The house groaned, a deep, structural shriek of metal and stone protesting the foundations beneath them. The floor began to tilt. Dust poured from the ceiling, and the sound of the ocean below intensified, hungry and waiting. Elena felt the surge of panic from the room, but more importantly she felt Elias's calm. He didn't look at the detonator. He looked at her. "Elena," he said, his voice resonant and clear above the cacophony of the collapsing structure. "We don't fight him as individuals anymore. We aren't two separate souls struggling for air. We are the circuit." He reached out, closing the distance, and as his fingers interlaced with hers, the world shifted. It wasn't just a touch, it was a fusion. Elena felt the vast ancient network of the Thorn legacy flow into her, a golden liquid fire that poured through the bond and into the space around them. She didn't need to move. She didn't need to fight. She simply willed the foundation of the house to hold. She reached out with her mind, finding the frequency of the charges Julian had placed. She felt the electrical impulses in the detonator, the delicate wiring of the explosives, and with a sharp mental snap she severed them. The detonator in Julian's hand sparked, sizzled and went dead. Julian stared at the useless plastic in his hands, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror. What are you?" Elias stepped forward, his presence now so commanding that the very shadows seemed to bow before him. "We are the ending of your schemes, Julian. We are the architects of a future you were never meant to rule." With a single, focused gesture, Elias projected the force of the bond outward. It wasn't a physical blow but a psychic weight, a manifestation of their combined will that knocked Julian back against the wall, pinning him there with the force of an invisible absolute authority. The room ceased its trembling. The house settled, the structural integrity reinforced by the very power Julian had sought to destroy. "I am absolutely blown away by this climax, and I hope you are too. If you are sitting there with goosebumps right now, please let me know in the comments. This is the kind of epic resolution we all live for. And please, if you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We have one final heartwarming part to go, and you won't want to miss the beautiful conclusion to their journey." The mercenaries in the hallway dropped their weapons, their eyes vacant and terrified as they fled the unnatural, suffocating energy that now saturated the estate. Julian slumped to the floor, his spirit finally broken, the ambition that had driven him to darkness flickering out like a guttering candle. Elena and Elias didn't even glance at him. They were locked in the center of the room, their foreheads touching, their breathing synchronized. They had faced the darkest hour. They had stood against the man who had tried to erase their futures, and they had come out on the other side not just as survivors, but as a force of nature. The climactic battle was over, the threat neutralized by the very bond they had feared. Now there was only the quiet, the dawn breaking over the horizon, and the terrifying, beautiful certainty of what came next. The first light of dawn began to bleed across the horizon, turning the jagged gray sea into a ribbon of shimmering gold. The estate, which only hours ago had been a battlefield, now felt like a sanctuary. The shattered windows had long since been stilled, and the heavy, oppressive weight of the storm had been replaced by the soft, rhythmic sighing of the tide against the cliffs. Julian was gone, escorted away in silence by the silent, efficient security forces that had emerged from the woodwork. Men who took their orders from the true Thorn heir, not the pretender who had tried to gamble their legacy on a lie. He didn't fight back, he didn't even look up. He had seen the power that now existed between Elena and Elias, and he understood with a crushing finality that he had never stood a chance against a force as ancient and absolute as a soul-deep bond. Elena sat in the high-backed velvet chair by the window watching the sunrise. He felt different. The uncertainty that had defined her life for the last 2 years, the restless, clawing feeling that she was missing her place in the world, was gone. In its place was a profound, humming peace. She wasn't just Elena the archivist anymore. She was part of something that stretched back centuries, a partner to a man who had finally opened his vault of a heart. Elias walked into the room, his movements no longer the sharp, predatory gait of a man at war, but the measured, steady stride of a man finally at home. He knelt beside her chair, his eyes reflecting the soft, morning light. He didn't speak immediately. He just took her hand, the silver mark on their wrists glowing with a faint, steady pulse that felt like a shared heartbeat. "You changed everything," he said, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. I spent my life guarding a power I didn't think I could survive. I thought the bond was a cage. I was wrong. It's the only thing that's ever made me free. Elena leaned down, her fingers tracing the sharp, handsome line of his jaw. She realized then that she hadn't just saved him. He had saved her from a life of quiet desperation, of settling for less, of believing she was destined to be forgotten. They had arrived here on the worst night of their lives, and they were leaving as the foundation for a new, brilliant chapter. "We're not the people who walked into that wedding," she whispered, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "No," Elias agreed, pressing his forehead against hers. "We're exactly who we were meant to be." As the sun fully crested the horizon, painting the room in hues of amber and violet, they sat in the quiet, the bond between them a radiant, unbreakable tether. They had faced the shadows of the past and the fury of the present, and they had found the only thing that mattered in the end: each other. The chaos of the wedding, the heartbreak of the breakup, and the fear of the unknown, it all fell away, leaving behind the promise of a future they would build together, day by beautiful day. And that, my friends, is how a story is supposed to end. I hope you felt every ounce of that journey with them. It's been an absolute honor to share this story with you. If you've enjoyed this whirlwind as much as I have, please do me a huge favor. Leave a comment telling me your favorite part of the story and make sure you're subscribed so we can do this all again soon. Your support makes this channel the incredible place it is. Until next time, stay brave, stay hopeful, and keep looking for the magic in your own story. The final, lingering silence was not one of suspense or fear, but of absolute, earned fulfillment. The war for the Thorn legacy was over, but the story of Elena and Elias was only just beginning. They turned toward the door together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the world had in store, knowing that as long as they had the bond, they would never have to walk alone again.